All right. We have with us today Mr. Bill Dedman, one of the lead reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. He designed the hidden camera project called Long Island Divided, which showed agents reinforcing racial segregation through illegal steering of home buyers. This project has launched investigations by state and federal authorities and several steps by the National Association of Realtors to increase awareness of fair housing issues. Newsday's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Long Island Divided and its 40-minute documentary film, Testing the Divide, sorry, I already had the mistakes in the words, are online at newsday.com/divided. Bill is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter and #1 best-selling author of the biography, Empty Mansions. He received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the color of money, his series on racial discrimination by home lenders in middle-income Black neighborhoods. He has spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, and many other local and state realtor associations across the country, including many financial associations. Bill is going to address today how the tests of real estate agents were conducted, the major findings of those, what can agents do to ensure fair treatment of consumers, and what training and resources are available. So with that, I'm so thankful to introduce you, Bill, to Delaware. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you our Newsday team's work on fair housing. Thank you so much for inviting me. You know, it's surprising that real estate associations around the country have responded to a newspaper's investigation and are using it to provoke an important conversation. I'm hoping that together we can dive into looking at some clips from our Newsday video of agents in action, perhaps not on their best days, and that we can talk about some of the hard issues, for example, what agents can say about schools. My goal is for this session to be helpful to you and also challenging, something for you to think about and to take action on.
You won the Pulitzer Prize for an investigation into mortgage lending practices. I thought it might be interesting for our viewers to hear a brief summary of that investigation and how that investigation compares to this one in Long Island.
Yes, a couple of connections. First, the stories in the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money. They're online. They were about redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders doing business on one part of the map, but not another, or rather accepting deposits from one part of the map, but only making loans, accepting deposits everywhere, making loans only in one part of the map. This was back in the late 1980s, and redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, but it seemed to be thought of as something from the past. But we found lenders, particularly banks, making home loans in white areas, even lower income white areas, but not in Black areas, even the higher income Black areas of Atlanta that were home to Coretta Scott King and vice presidents at Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. A couple of lessons. First, the customer would have no way to know where the banks didn't make loans. And therefore, the customer would have no basis for making a complaint. The banks in Atlanta told us no one's ever complained. But we looked at how the banks operated. We found differences in branch locations, where branches had been opened and closed, and more subtle differences, like which real estate agents the banks were marketing to, where customers could and couldn't put in a loan application. I think one lesson was how small actions, perhaps unintentionally, could have a long-lasting impact in perpetuating a segregated system. I'd like to mention a more recent project for the Boston Globe. It's also connected. We were looking at traffic stops in Massachusetts. Our series was called Speed Trap. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we were all speeding. And again, you have no way to know if you're being treated equally. If you get a warning instead of a ticket, did everyone else get a warning? If you get a ticket, Did everyone going that speed get a ticket? So it's similar to being a banking customer or a real estate customer. You would have no basis for a complaint. What we found was that in Massachusetts, who gets a ticket and who gets a warning is pretty easy to predict if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For example, women much more often got a warning, especially younger women. That break continues up to about age 40. It's the same as who gets roles in Hollywood. We wrote about one young college student. She had had 5 warnings in 6 weeks. Minorities almost always got the ticket, especially younger Black and Latino men. So there seemed to be some racial profiling at work in that decision being made at the window. Again, the customers wouldn't know, and maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it broke down. Now, with home mortgages, with traffic tickets, the public records gave us a picture of the result, what was happening, but not really how it was happening. We had to dig in to try to find that out. I think what's different about Long Island Divided and this investigation of steering by real estate agents is that we're not coming along later looking at records. With the video cameras, you can watch people violate the law. I also think it matters a great deal that you can see specific agents, their faces, and the names of their companies. And I think having that caught on video increases the chances that it would lead to some impact, some changing in the system.
The Newsday investigation has become the most prominent example or in existence of race-based bias in real estate. Why did Newsday start the investigation in the beginning?
Oh, so Wes, just set the scene. Many of you may know Long Island. It stretches 100 miles out into the Atlantic, east of New York City. It's about 3 million people in a heavily segregated suburb, perhaps the most heavily segregated in the nation. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean there's a lot of diversity overall, people of all races and nationalities, but especially African Americans are concentrated in very few communities. Out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8. Now, we had heard stories, anecdotes all through the years from Black homebuyers encountering problems when they shop for a home outside of those few communities. And we heard this even from our own colleagues at the newspaper. Newsday decided to follow the methods used by fair housing agencies doing testing, with the addition of hidden cameras for video and audio. That's legal in New York, and it's legal in most states. It's legal in Delaware. Most state laws require only one party to a conversation, and that party can be the tester, the home buyer, to consent to audio recording. But hidden audio recording is not allowed in about a dozen states. But still, testing can happen everywhere. In any state, testers can be debriefed. We can make a map of the listings that they were given and lay that over census data. Now, I'd like to show you an introductory part of our documentary film. What happened in this case surprised us, but we saw it over and over again. One customer receives service from an agent, while another customer in the same circumstance is refused service. It'll just take me a moment to start this video for you.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to say to you anything unless you don't want to store your car to buy your plane.
or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way. Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
I can't claim as a real estate agent to show the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house. Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out any money unless I do have a pre-qualification. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Bill, could you give us a summary of the tests? Who was tested and what were some of the outcomes?
Yes. So we didn't do any testing for rentals. We were testing only for home purchases. And we were sending out first-time home buyers. We'd send a white home buyer and then an Asian home buyer, or white and then black, or white and then Hispanic. And we would mix up the order of who would see the agent first. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. So they were first-time home buyers. So that meant that selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same gender and roughly the same age. We dressed them in the same business casual style. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women. They asked for the same number of bedrooms, they had the same family size, and they were prepared to give the same income and same credit scores, but rarely were asked for any financial information other than mortgage pre-approval status, as you saw, on which they were the same. We shop for houses from entry level. Now, in New York City area prices, entry level is about $400,000 to the high end, $7 million. There are more expensive homes. $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house in the Hamptons, but it'll get you into his neighborhood. It was always, though, the same price range given by both testers. And they saw the same agent. Now, that wouldn't really be necessary for a fair housing lawsuit. Under the law, 2 different agents at the same brokerage are also supposed to treat customers equally. But we thought it would be more fair and more persuasive to have the same agent see both customers. How did we pick the agents? We didn't. The brokerages picked which agents would be tested, though they didn't know it. Whoever was on the board to handle walk-ins or phone calls or internet contacts, that was the agent tested. We did 86 of these matched pairs. at 12 companies, 12 brands that together represent more than half of the sellers in our market. Familiar names: Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, as well as some large and small regional brands. Our team then reviewed more than 200 hours of videos to see how the customers were treated and mapped thousands of listings to see what school districts and communities they had been directed to. We didn't feel comfortable being the referees, so we had two fair housing experts review each test for equal treatment. One had run a testing program for the Department of Justice, and the other is a law professor who wrote the textbook on fair housing law. Only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call an agent out of bounds. Before we published, our team gave the agents and their brokerages details so they could watch the videos and respond to our findings before we published. So this was a careful effort. It took more than 3 years. This was not a drive-by investigation. Now the results. The agents gave unequal treatment in 40% of our tests. The results varied in interesting ways. Asian buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time, or 2 out of 10. I think it surprised us how we found differences for every group. Hispanic buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And Black buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Now, most of the attention has been on that high difference for Black customers, but let's not lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers, if 2 out of 10 Asian buyers were treated poorly half a century after the civil rights laws were passed, those seemed like high numbers as well. We viewed this as testing the gatekeepers in real estate to see how they perform. 2 companies out of 12, 2 of the smallest regional brands, were the only ones to pass all of their tests. It's fair to say that most of these major national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. Now, you have to ask yourself, would the results be any different if we repeated the test in your communities? If this weekend, 4 retired police officers from DC, 1 white, 1 Black, 1 Asian, 1 Hispanic, and their families come shopping for homes in Delaware communities, will they, if they have the same price range, go home on Monday receiving the same listings in their email? Now, what sort of differences did we see? First, we saw steering. Agents directed 1 out of 4 of our minority home buyers into different communities and different school districts altogether than their white counterparts. We also saw differences in how buyers were screened or pre-qualified. There were occasions where a minority buyer would be asked for ID, but the white buyer would not. Some agents wouldn't help our Black or Hispanic buyer unless they signed an exclusive contract, but the brokerage didn't require a contract of the white buyer. And then there were inappropriate comments by agents. You know, it's interesting. Minority buyers were not subjected to racial comments or inappropriate remarks. We're past the days of signs that say whites only. Things are more subtle. It was the white buyers who heard inappropriate comments about race and schools and resale value and crime. Here's a video clip that highlights this problem of inappropriate comments. It'll take me just a moment to get that started for you. All right, here we go, just a moment.
Okay.
And they really took over Springs in Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value. All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. It's mini United Nations.
Because you feel more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the people.
Bayshore has two school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district. I can't say anything, but I encourage you. I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your white diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
You know. I don't want to use the word steer when I try to use educated the areas. You know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ? Hey, Russ. Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Almont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, you know.
It may be that some agents have gotten a message through the years that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might get offended and might complain about it. Perhaps our test suggests that we need more attention to steering, to differential treatment, more attention to what people do and not just what they say. And are they giving the same advice to all clients? Are they treating all clients equally?
So with steering, what kind of forms of unequal treatment did that take?
Oh, so, you know, it's steering sort of an imprecise term. Wes, I admit I sort of use it, and many do, as sort of a catch-all for various behaviors. But for example, telling one person that there is no housing in an area, you won't find anything in that area in your price range, but then showing housing in that price range in that area to another buyer. We saw that happen. Making unsolicited comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about the schools, comments about crime or resale values as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from living there. That's steering, especially while giving contrary information or being silent on those matters with someone else. We've heard agents, you heard an example of an agent telling a white buyer to avoid an area because of poor resale values, while encouraging the minority buyer, you might like it there. We also saw differences in just the level of service. Overall, our white testers got 50%, 50% more listings than their black counterparts. Now, we've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but look at it neighborhood by neighborhood for a minute. Both testers would ask for an area, let's say within half an hour of downtown. And that area, that circle, would include many communities and neighborhoods and schools. But sometimes homes that were for sale in the wider residential parts of that circle, those listings would be given only to our white buyer. So minorities were in effect steered around those communities. That's what we were testing for, and that's what we found. And we found something we hadn't expected. We had minority communities. They're inside the circle for both buyers, where neither buyer, either race, gets those listings. They're not given to either buyer, although homes are for sale in the price range. These were the communities with more than a modest amount of Black population. And the agents were steering around those for everyone. Now, our legal experts said, wait, who has the lawsuit in that case? It's a long list. Not only are the white and minority homebuyers being steered illegally, both the white and minority homebuyers are being harmed by being steered around the minority communities. But also the communities themselves are being harmed, the governments, and anyone who has tried to sell a home in those areas. And their listing brokers have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act against the brokers whose agents are steering around their communities. And you know why. Fewer buyers means lower prices, lower home values, lower appraisals, lower home equity, and less tax money for playgrounds and libraries and schools. Now, here's a video clip with a classic example of steering. An agent tells one family, one man shopping for his wife and teenager, that an area would be a good place to live with the nicest neighbors, while the agent warns another man shopping for his family, his wife and teenager, that it's a dangerous place. Just a moment, we'll start that. It'll take just a moment. Trust me, nothing bad is going to happen here. There we go. All right.
Kelvin Toon is a Black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and Black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our Black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people.
When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going.
Do you want
to
to give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white tester saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the Black tester. The listings centered Black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Bill, do you think many of these agents knew they were steering? Is this, we hear them say it in these clips, but could this be something with unconscious bias?
We did hear agents say things like, I shouldn't be steering, but it was sort of the real estate equivalent of hold my beer. I think unconscious bias, implicit bias, the bias that we all may have and may not know about. These are fascinating topics. I think the first point to make, though, is that it doesn't matter legally. The Fair Housing Act and your state and local laws cover behavior, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. If an agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, the agent has violated the law. To remind you, those categories are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, usually meaning having children or being pregnant. And you may also have state or local laws that may include marital status or sexual orientation or other categories. Now, it is interesting to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to consider why it's happening. Some agents may in effect be profiling or assuming that the person of color can't really afford homes in that price range that they've given, or won't qualify for the mortgage, and may be wasting the agent's time, while accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. Let's talk about profiling for a minute. One of the difficult things to grasp about profiling is that it's so ineffective. We usually talk about profiling as though it's a shortcut to success. We have TV shows about FBI crime profilers. But experts in many fields say that the real problem with profiling is that it doesn't work. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Who plays violent video games? Who dresses a certain way? These are not good predictors of who will be a school shooter. You understand the problem. The profile fits too many good kids and may miss the kid who's planning an attack. What is a better predictor? Acquiring weapons, hiding them, telling other students about plans specifically or vaguely. Watch out, don't be in the cafeteria on Thursday. Or think about counterterrorism work and airport safety. Religion is not a good way to identify who will be a terrorist. You waste too many investigative resources on the wrong people and may miss the people you should be looking at. And if you think about it, in real estate, race is not a good way to identify which customers can afford a home. You leave too much money on the table if you assume that people of color can't be good customers. Besides, it's illegal. So why do it? Some agents may think, consciously or not, that they'll make money faster with less effort if they sort of sort people, if they show people homes, as you heard one agent say, where you'll feel comfortable. But why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Some may not. Besides, steering is illegal. Some agents may be bowing to a bias that they expect from others, sort of playing to the lowest common denominator, intentionally or not. An agent could fear that the sellers might be angry if they brought a minority buyer to the home, or that the neighbors, who are, after all, potential customers in the future, may be upset if the agent is seen as integrating or changing a block or neighborhood. Agents could think that appraisers or lenders may be biased. And there is recent evidence, studies in disparities in lending and in appraising. And that might make it harder to close the sale. But say it with me, steering is illegal. You know, I guess it's possible that a few agents have just an outright prejudice, a bias, but I assume that is a tiny group, so small as to be irrelevant to our discussion. There's just too much steering to be accounted for by outright prejudice. As others have pointed out, it can't just be bad people doing it. The good people have to be doing it too. You know, in general, on issues of race, it's pretty easy to burn up all the energy as heat on the question of who's the racist, who might be the bigot in our office. Are they saying I'm a bigot? It's not very productive. It might be more productive to apply light to a question that's more of sort of an engineering question. Just how does it work in our office? Is what we're doing sure to be treating people the same? Can an agent, to put it another way, can a broker in our office be confident that the agent seeing two different customers will give them both the same listings? Can a broker whose license is on the line be confident that two different agents will give two different customers who have the same criteria, the same listings? You have that confidence in your brokerage? Because under the law, it's what you do that counts. I do think it's interesting to consider the point of view of the home buyer, even if in our study they were actors, testing the agents. Our testers often came back from the real estate office telling us that agent was so nice, she was so helpful. They only learned the truth when our team brought the two buyers together to watch videos and to see the maps of the listings that they'd been given. Here's a video clip where you'll see some of the testers, you'll meet them, and also hear from a fair housing expert who often works with testers. Just a moment. All right, here we come. Always takes me a second.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map. I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like,
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school district, safety, crime, resale.
You know, this agent with the map sort of looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily. But he had a different invasion plan for buyers of different races. For the white buyers, it was don't get off the highway until you get past these neighborhoods. One of the patterns that surprised us was when agents would begin their presentations to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers with inappropriate comments or with information or guidance that violates the fair housing laws. You know, it wasn't as though these were offhand slurs that were being uttered when someone cuts you off in traffic when the agent's out on a home tour. No, it seemed to be the sales pitch. It seemed to be the standard guidance for narrowing the home search. I hate to say it, but for these agents, it seemed that steering was a big part of the service that they were selling to their new customers.
We've heard about schools a few times. What role did the schools play in the general actions of these agents?
Wes, I don't know how it works in Delaware, but on Long Island, our agents would explain to our buyers everything is by schools. Agents would tout one district over another. Some districts were blue ribbon and others were declining. And often they gave different information to different buyers. Let's step back for a moment. America's school districts are so segregated by race in many communities that directing someone to a certain school is the same as directing them to an area with higher or lower minority population. It's hard to believe it, but America's schools are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago when this gray-haired gent graduated from high school. School segregation and housing segregation, of course, are intertwined because we have school districts. Now, some agents have picked up the idea, well, I can't talk about schools at all. You may have heard an agent say, I can't mention schools. But the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. And our legal experts tell us that agents can give straightforward, factual information. Agents can answer questions about schools. Agents can refer customers to websites or brochures with information. The problem arises when the agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers, or making comments about the demographics in schools or resale value or other attributes of schools to steer customers away from districts. And you realize that you don't have to mention race to be steering. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and then we'll dig into this a little bit further. You'll hear from the law professor who was an advisor on our project. Just a moment. Here we go. We're going to share that with you.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville school districts?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is the race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 24. Okay. You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
You know, that agent at the end there who was writing, she was making lists of schools for each buyer and helpfully made a list and sent the buyers from the real estate office back to the newspaper office with different lists. Now let's dig in a little bit more on schools. How do you discuss school quality? Because I know your customers ask you about school quality without violating the Fair Housing Act. You all understand you don't have to talk about race to be steering. You all understand that if the districts vary by race and you're promoting one over another, you're steering, especially if you're giving different information to different buyers or being silent with one buyer. So what do agents do? Some companies suggest that agents not talk about schools. Some suggest that, well, you can limit your information to answering factual questions, as the professor said, but stay away from the trap of using or responding to vague labels such as good schools or nice schools or high-performing schools. First of all, realize that the same schools are not good for everybody. Some people really want the band program and other people really want the lacrosse program. Also, how do you know which schools are good? if it's okay to share websites with objective information, and it's okay to do that legally, is it okay to talk about school test scores? Let's talk about school test scores. Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores tell you mostly how wealthy and educated are the parents who send their kids to that school. In America, wealth and education of parents is a very good predictor, not absolute, but very good predictor of their children's test scores. And in America, race is a pretty good predictor of wealth and education of the parents. So you see the problem. A high-performing school, so-called, may just be a wealthier area. And a school with lower test scores might actually be the higher performing one, where good teachers are bringing up the scores of students who are growing up in working class households with fewer advantages. Now, this word is getting around. Just recently, greatschools.org, the school ranking website, many agents refer customers to that website, has realized this pitfall. It realized, well, the way we're doing it is just perpetuating segregation. And it's changed its ratings, especially in states where it was basing the ratings entirely on test scores. And NAR has spoken up in favor of this change. Now, you want a bottom line. Can you talk about school test scores? Can you refer parents to websites listing them? Yes, you can, if you give the same information to everyone. Not falling into the trap of, oh, that's a good school for you, and oh, no, you're not going to like that school. If you don't fall into that trap, if you give the same information to everyone, you can. But you might ask yourself if it's right to share that information in a country as segregated as ours, because the customers will make the mistake of thinking that higher test scores equals better schools, which it doesn't. That's sort of a moral question, not a legal question. NAR realizes that schools and guidance on schools is an area that's likely to change over the next few years, and where our awareness is growing. And NAR is making a film about this. It's going to come out at the end of this year, so watch for that.
Yeah, we have you here today. What other kind of reaction have you saw and heard from organized real estate, including the government reaction to all this?
Oh yeah, Wes, I guess it's fair to say that we've raised awareness of these issues. Often I'm asked what happened to the specific agents in our videos. We know that disciplinary hearings for agents and brokers are continuing probably through this year. And one agent gave up her license rather than go through the disciplinary process. There are about 100 agents and brokers in New York who are in danger of not being able to renew or losing their license because of these tests. That's about 30 some agents, and then they're brokers, and often there's more than one broker of record who's in the dock. We did see all the agents and brokers when they were called to testify in public before a state Senate committee hearing. They were sworn in and asked questions, and you can watch it on YouTube. Some handled it well, saying they hadn't understood that they were violating the law, but they realized now that what they said was inappropriate. Others got sort of a public thrashing. The agent who said, follow the school bus, see what mothers are waiting to meet the bus. She said, I just wanted my customers to know where the bus routes were. And the agent who said the Hispanics are taking over the neighborhood, he said he meant that in a positive way. I think the most surprising part of the hearing was the brokers who said they had reviewed the tests and found that nobody did anything wrong. Not in a single test did anyone do anything they shouldn't have. Their position seemed to be that if steering isn't announced, if you don't say out loud, I'm now going to be violating the law, then it's not illegal. But you know better, and the senators know better. After the hearing, the New York State Senate unanimously approved changes in state law. And action is coming up next in the state assembly. But I just want to mention to you what those changes are, because changes in state law have a tendency to creep from state to state. So let me just quickly describe for you what changes have been approved by half of the legislature unanimously in New York. Very simply, more testing. And the testing is not to be done by the regular department that regulates real estate agents, but by the state attorney general's office, which has subpoena power. More fees on the broker's license, $30 every other year, $10 for a salesperson every other year. That money pays for the testing. Requiring standard procedures at a brokerage for what you do when you bring in a new client. Do the same thing for everyone, pre-qualify everyone the same way. Training on bias and the legacy of segregation, training on fair housing laws. We found that there was already training required in New York State, but it was rather slipshod. It was jokey. It hardly mentioned steering at all. Damages available to victims of discrimination, and doubling the fines on license holders who break the discrimination laws. Where does that fine money go? It goes to pay for more testing. The senators understood that testing is key. You know, if you want to stop steering, if you want to enforce, let's say you don't want speeding to happen, you'll have more enforcement because it has a deterrent effect. So we'll see what happens in the states. Also at the federal level, HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, has already begun to, I guess it's fair to say, resume enforcement of the Fair Housing Act under the new president and new HUD secretary. So we'll see what happens there.
So, you know, based on all these investigations, all the reports that have been done, what do you think are the best ways to combat racism in real estate that exists?
Well, Wes, let's talk about the fixes that have been proposed and how far will they take us? Maybe the task isn't really to eliminate racism, that's rather vague, but let's eliminate unequal treatment. NAR has responded vigorously to the Newsday investigation, and its effort is interesting. Let's talk about that. NAR has a new program called ACT, A-C-T. A for accountability, C for culture change, T for training. Under accountability, NAR has been working with state associations like yours to examine state licensing laws and to point out where there are gaps in fair housing enforcement. That's a new thing. A national trade group working with state associations to make tougher regulations and greater enforcement. I think the idea is if we don't police ourselves, others will police us. And NAR has developed a voluntary program. You could opt in, a broker or company could opt in, of self-testing, helping companies or associations that want to test their own agents for compliance with the fair housing laws. Now, you might think there wouldn't be any such companies, but there are. The CEO of Realogy, the largest real estate company in America, which owns, as you know, Century 21 and Coldwell Banker and Sotheby's International, said, we should be testing our own agents. And NAR said, we'll meet you halfway. So it's developing a sort of a cookbook and cooperative work with fair housing groups that can do this testing. Now, it's not public testing like ours was. It's proprietary, internal testing. It wouldn't be made public. You wouldn't see it on YouTube. But there's a level of accountability there. I heard from a state association in Washington State that said, yeah, we're going to start testing our agents. I heard from a local association in Buffalo, New York that said, yeah, we got a grant. We're going to be testing our own agents. This is very new. Now, C for culture change. Now let's just take a long view. You know that today, fair housing is a core component of your realtor code of ethics, not just in April. You may not be old enough to remember that for 50 years, the same code of ethics prohibited realtors from selling a home in a white neighborhood to a person of color. That prohibition continued into the 1970s with a code word, anyone who was said to be, quote, detrimental to the neighborhood. So let's acknowledge that cultures can be changed and that change can take a long time. There is a long tradition in America of legal, at the time, activities, of redlining, of blockbusting, of racial covenants on deeds limiting who you can sell your home to, of predatory subprime lending that stripped home equity out of minority neighborhoods. We're not saying that real estate agents created segregation. Many of you have read Richard Rothstein's wonderful book, The Color of Law, which lays segregation at the feet of government action. Back to the New Deal days of the 1930s and 1940s, particularly when financing was available only to white buyers, only to the white GIs coming back could they get the financing when the modern suburbs were developed. So these are not just historical facts, but continue today. We've seen studies in differences in appraisals, for example, in the past year. And let's acknowledge that the effects of segregation carry down from generation to generation, starting with the differences in wealth creation. We all know that home equity is the money that the grandkids use for college and to buy a home. Many of you saw that NAR this past fall made a public apology for longtime contributions to segregation and discrimination. And I watched some of the chatter on Facebook where some agents said, I missed it. What were we apologizing for? So let's acknowledge that culture change can take a while. Now, I mentioned that New York already has new classes, but under training, I'd like to mention just a couple of things at the national level. NAR has a new course that it's rolling out this spring and summer. It's a new course on implicit bias. NAR has shared materials, sort of generic materials on implicit bias in the past, but the new course is on real estate, and it's designed as a 3-hour course for brokers on how to recognize and overcome implicit bias. And the idea is that the brokers could then teach the course or lead a discussion with their agents. And many of you have tried or had challenges in your associations to have everyone try Fairhaven, the new game or simulation that NAR rolled out last fall. It lets you experience the pitfalls of fair housing. You're an agent trying to close deals, or you're the customer. In a way, it's trying to teach the law, but also empathy. It's very well done. And it takes about an hour to go through it. And I encourage you all to give it a try. It's at fairhaven.realtor. Now, finally, NAR is making a film about good role models. Remember, 2 of our 12 companies passed all their tests and we wrote about them. All of this seems useful. Let me just sort of close with this thought. I realize that you all want to make sure that everybody who comes into your brokerage, who calls, who emails, is treated equally. That's your goal. And I do realize that quality control is difficult in an industry where agents are independent, self-motivated, and working from home and from SUVs, and some are part-time. We were lay people as journalists, but we would discuss as we were sending the testers out and then watching the videos when they came back, we would discuss, well, if we wanted to stop steering from happening in our mythical real estate brokerage, what would we do? And well, first, we all understand that it's not a fix to say, well, we respond if anyone complains, because we all understand no one would know they're being steered, so no one would complain. It did seem clear that the agents in our test didn't have a rigorous standard for what they do and don't do with every customer, a checklist. Checklists have been very helpful with, for example, of flying an airplane safely or having a surgery safely. There are a lot of fields where checklists help. We would see customers come back, one with a thick folder and one with a skinny folder from the same agent. And that seems like something you can fix. You could argue that it will help to diversify the real estate workforce, to have more minority agents and brokers, and that would have many benefits. But it can't be the only solution. It's not a cure-all for steering. We saw steering and discrimination by agents of all backgrounds. Just as you can see police brutality, for example, by some minority officers. That's why people talk about a systemic problem. It did seem clear that many agents in our tests were unfamiliar with the minority neighborhoods. After my banking stories in Atlanta, one bank put its lenders on a bus to tour the wonderful new homes in a Black subdivision. I remember them looking in the windows of these homes under construction at the magnificent kitchens in a neighborhood they were unaware of, and from its location was clear it was going to be a Black neighborhood. And it busted some of their stereotypes about Black neighborhoods. Maybe a bus tour wouldn't be a bad idea again. We did notice that our large real estate brands had more than 200 branch offices in our area, but not a single one was in a minority community, not one. And those large real estate brands didn't represent many sellers in those minority areas either. I have to wonder about the role of brokers. Brokers, do you make an effort to know whether steering is happening in your offices? Do you, for example, check on which listings agents give customers? Do you come along later and see what neighborhoods or schools they were sent? And whether other areas might have matched up with the customer's actual criteria. Our agents would interview the testers, the buyers, and then for a little bit, and then would turn to a computer screen and start to generate listings, would be clicking on communities and schools in the MLS or in their internal software to have listings sent by email. That's the moment, if you think about it, that's the moment where steering is happening, which means it's in the computer. Do you have tools from your MLS that send you a report every month on which neighborhoods and schools your agents chose? If you don't get that, do you demand it? I wonder if agents have a consistent, ironclad way of qualifying customers. If you have a requirement that everybody be pre-approved before you take them out to show them homes, that's okay. And if you have a requirement that you don't require, if you have a rule, we don't require the pre-approval because people are new, home buyers, will educate them and they'll be customers. That's okay too. The problem happens in between where some people get the break, some people get the warning, and some get the ticket. Do you ask credit scores of everyone or no one? Do you ask income? Do you check ID for everyone or no one? Let me give the law professor, Bob Schwem, sort of a closing thought about this. He's from the University of Kentucky and was an advisor on our project. And this is just a very brief clip, just a moment. Just takes a second.
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you get two people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listing? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way? It's not that big a burden. This is a law. This should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents, if you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Now, the professor really steps up to the plate there. I think the hard part is that you all want to obey the law. We just may not have been thinking of it in terms of, how are the gaps? Where are the little places where differences might creep in and how do we plug those gaps? Finally, NAR offers 2 straightforward suggestions on avoiding steering. Listen to these 2. First, NAR suggests provide customers with listings based on their objective criteria: home size, a pool or not, waterfront or not, corner lot or not on vague terms such as nice neighborhood or good schools or safe. Second, NAR suggests that agents pay attention to unconscious bias when evaluating what listings you've given a customer. Ask yourself why you may have eliminated certain areas. Now, I'm a layman, but I have a question. Don't those 2 good pieces of advice, aren't they somewhat contradictory? If you give listings based only on objective criteria given to you by the customer's limitations, why would you be eliminating any other areas? So I think I'm with the professor. The best way to stop illegal steering may be to stop steering customers at all. Why don't you just send them all the listings? I know that you all want to make sure everybody's treated fairly. I hope that you will share our stories and 40-minute film with everyone in your office. The project's called Long Island Divided. The film is called Testing the Divide. They're all at the same address. That address is simply newsday.com/divided. Have a movie night, post it on Facebook, share it with everyone. But don't stop there, have a conversation. I don't mean a finger pointing who's the bigot in our office conversation. No, how does it work in our office? How much confidence do we have that everybody gets the same listings, that everyone is pre-qualified the same way? What specific steps can we take to make sure that that happens? I appreciate you inviting me to meet with you. I hope that this has given you something to discuss with your colleagues and your customers, and I'm hoping that you have some additional questions for me. Thank you very much.
Bill, thank you so much for this, very enlightening presentation. We do have a lot of questions, and I know
I'll take them.
But I do want to mention, just for the sake of everyone, just to know, last year we created a diversity and inclusion committee at the association, and we had just met actually right before this, and a lot of the suggestions, a lot of the programming from NAR we've been working on. And actually, I pulled it out real quick. We have a whole roadmap of issues we're tackling right now that the committee is working on. So, we're doing our part as an association the best we can. We're trying to cover every aspect. So keep a watch out in your emails. We have a monthly diversity email. Take a look at that. But you'll be hearing a lot more. One of the things that Bill just mentioned was some sort of voluntary testing program. We're looking at that as well. It's a bit difficult to set up, but we are looking at that, and maybe we'll be able to launch that sometime this year. So with that, Bill, I'm just going to pick some of the questions I thought were interesting for you here. One was, she's actually curious if agents of color were also steering.
Yes, we didn't make any attempt to look at what the race was or ethnicity was of the agents we were choosing to test. We just, drew water from the same barrel that we figured the customers would be drawing from. It was clear that there was steering by agents with South Asian backgrounds or Eastern European backgrounds or agents of all backgrounds. It didn't seem to be that different based on the background of the agent. I think this is an interesting point. Sometimes people ask if steering is also done by minority agents, because it may seem to some people that if minority agents are doing it, then it's not discrimination, because it's not a bias, a prejudice against someone. And I just don't think that's the way the world works. We see discrimination by police officers who are white, Black, Asian, Hispanic. Look at the George Floyd case. You've got a rainbow of police officers on that scene. That's why people talk about systemic problems. And some of those sorts of things might be lessened over time by having more minority officers, by having more minority agents, by having more minority supervisors and brokers. But that can't be the only fix, because people of all backgrounds were engaging in steering.
I don't believe I heard anything about disability. Did you test for disabilities?
Yeah, we did. We only tested for race and ethnicity, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic. Most of the, I'll tell you one reason. Disability, first of all, it took us 3 years as it was, and testing's very hard. And so we just stuck to our knitting. How tempting would it have been for a newspaper in the New York City suburbs to test a prominent real estate brokerage in New York City owned by the Trump organization? But we didn't do it because we had enough to do. Most of the complaints that go to HUD under fair housing laws are about disability issues, because disability discrimination is a little more obvious. The person knows that they have a disability, and often it's obvious that they have a disability, and then they're denied, say, an apartment, or an accommodation is not made for a service animal. So we felt like there's already a lot of attention on that. We could have tested, for example, for religion. It occurred to us to send out, clearly Muslim buyers, but we didn't do that either. We're not saying that those aren't valid areas. You could do testing in a lot of areas. For example, gay couples versus straight couples. There's a lot of interesting areas to explore, but we started with this.
Okay. Did any of the testers in particular ask to be steered based on the protected status to determine the reaction of the agents?
No, we were very careful. Our testers all went through 2 days of training. They were given not only training, but then rehearsal on their scripts with us. Are you pre-approved? What's your wife's name? What's your job? Lots of rehearsal. And then we watched the videos, and we would have thrown a test out if the buyer was introducing any element of steering. We would have tossed the test immediately and not even done the other half of it. It was they were coached very carefully on that idea that they were not going to be the ones who, they had only the requirements that they had. They didn't have preferences on garages and pools. They didn't have preferences. They didn't know the neighborhoods because they weren't from Long Island. So they didn't know Levittown from Massapequa, and they weren't injecting the steering.
Okay. I guess we have time for about 2 more questions, and I'll wrap it up here. Well, I just hit the button on my chair, so I just went down.
They've taken you down a peg finally.
Yeah, right. Prospective buyer asks about a community's demographics. I have heard in classes that in addition to saying that we don't keep this info, it's okay to advise them to walk around, ask questions of residents. But this seems like a sneaker version of follow the school bus and see the mothers, isn't it?
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. We all see what you're getting at. But, buyers are allowed to discriminate. The Fair Housing Act controls your action. It doesn't, if a person doesn't want to buy near any kind of people or thing, they don't have to. And you're the one controlled by the law, not them. And so I do understand that it's important not only to tell them to do their own homework or tell them to, but I think it's also important to tell them that there's a law. Some agents I sense from conversations are reluctant to mention, there's a fair housing law and we need to follow it. And I in a way, I want to tell you, buck up. It's okay. You can mention there's a law. The guy fixing my roof may tell me there's a building code. All right, I can't do it that way. I've got to follow the building code or get a permit. The guy fixing the car may tell me, I can't do it that way. It's not street legal. And we understand that. Customers are used to being told there's a law. And it's okay to tell them there's a law and to push back if it's the seller or the buyer introducing some sort of fair housing issue. And remember, the buyer may have, for example, a religious reason. I'm Orthodox Jewish and I want to live where I can walk to temple. They're allowed to limit the search to where they can walk to temple. They may have their own constraints.
And lastly, I hear this one quite often, and I know you covered a bit of it with the website on this, but the question is, what if a prospect asks for a specific school district in their discussions?
They can do that. And that's what you want them to do. You want them to do their own homework and have a preference. The safest thing for you to do is to give them all the listings. When they say they do or don't want certain school districts, you'll give them fewer listings. The more criteria, it's just like searching on Google. The more you ask for, the less you get. The more criteria in your search, the fewer you will get, because it has to meet all those criteria, right? I think that the reluctance to push back, I can see how there's some confusion on this. If they're giving you, I want this school district or I don't want that one, that's not something to push back against. That's what you want. But if they're asking you to choose their school district, tell me which are the good schools. That's where you need to be pushing back. A, not all schools are good for everybody. B, you don't know which schools are good. You're not an expert in schools. Sorry. So that's where you need to push back and say, just as with these buyer love letters, for example, and many of you have heard of this sort of guidance, which is relatively recent, which is don't do them. But your buyers are getting bad advice from the Wall Street Journal and other places saying, write a great letter to the sellers. I talked to a seller this weekend who said, oh yeah, the first 15 offers came in from Asian families and the next 3 came in from Jewish families. And we took the highest offer. We didn't base our decision on who. Well, she shouldn't know any of that. She shouldn't be tempted to make her decision based on any of that. A good agent would give her a spreadsheet listing the amounts and the financing and not the names and not any background identifying information. Because those letters, as you know, tempt the sellers into committing a fair housing violation that might rope you in, and it's your license on the line, right? So that's why NAR and your state associations are advising you, don't pass those letters on and tell buyers agents not to send them.
Yeah, and if no one has seen our notice about them, please give me a call. We can get that over to you. Bill, again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very enlightening session. I know our members have probably learned quite a bit. For everybody watching, we're going to have another hot topic session in June, marijuana and real estate. So if you're interested in either of those topics, feel free to tune in. I hope it's an enjoyable session as well. Again, Bill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.